afternoon, Dumelang, Sanibonani. Welcome to the Virtual Symposium for Harnessing Data Science for Health Discovery and Innovation in Africa, hosted by the National Institutes of Health Common Fund. My name is Pule Makhwadibe. I'm here with my colleagues, and I'm also here with Maggie Dugan, my co-facilitator, and we are a facilitation team that is supporting this virtual event. Now, our brief agenda for today is right behind me, but we'll have some welcome remarks and some data ecosystems and gateways overview. And then we'll have some panelists giving us 2-minute highlights of their presentations. And then they will spend a couple of minutes answering questions. And then after that, we'll have breakout sessions so that we can have discussions with one another. And then we'll have a plenary conclusion within those breakaway sessions. Now, today is the very last interactive panel session in the symposium, and we thank you for joining us. And please don't forget that tomorrow and Friday, we'll still have some office hours for 4 different funding opportunities, and we'll tell you more about that in the session. So you can always find the office hours to go to on KaiStorm to learn about the topics and the timing. And we'll also have a networking launch on KaiStorm. So there's still opportunities to engage, interact, and meet one another. Now, if you are on social media and you are tweeting or you are posting LinkedIn articles or Instagram or on any social media platform, please don't forget our hashtags. We'll also be putting them on our chat shortly. And our 3 hashtags for this entire conference are hashtag DSI Africa and hashtag NIH Africa Data and hashtag No Innovation with a KNOW. So remember to attach our hashtags whenever you post anything on social media. Maggie, I would like to invite you onto the stage to share some more information.
Thank you. On the virtual stage, for sure. As Puleng mentioned, we're with No Innovation. That's the KI in KaiStorm. People call us KI as well. And we facilitate accelerating scientific and academic innovation workshops. We bring together researchers from different disciplines around complex questions to generate exciting and novel research proposals. And because of COVID-19, we've started hosting virtual events like this one. We learned it takes a lot of people, so I just want to acknowledge that here with me today, not only is Puleng, but also Joe, Emma, Connie, Benjamin, Esh behind the scenes, helping to make everything come together. A few pointers: if you have any tech questions or you get lost at any point, you can always scroll down the KaiStorm menu to the Need Help page, and we'll help you sort it out there. We are recording this session today, so you can review this video later. If you want to see it again or see portions of it again, you'll find them not only on the KaiStorm platform, but also on the NIH YouTube channel. As Puleng mentioned, today is the final session of the symposium, and we'd really love to have your feedback. So on KaiStorm as well, you will see a new page posted today called a Symposium Feedback page. We invite you to, after the session today or anytime over the next couple of days, to visit it, click through and take a very quick survey to let us know about your experience with the entire virtual symposium over the last 2 weeks. Now, we turn to today's topic, ecosystems and gateways to foster research community networks across Africa. And we'll start with a welcome and an overview from the program director at the National Institutes of Health, Fogarty International Center, Ishwar Chandramouli Ishwaran. Ishwar.
Thank you, Maggie. Hello, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure and delight to welcome you all to this last interactive session, as Maggie said, of this DSI Africa Virtual Symposium. Hope everyone has enjoyed the various sessions thus far. And this session focuses particularly on data ecosystems and gateways that are intended to foster research community networks across Africa. So what we're going to talk about and discuss today is not specifically about the FOA per se. Questions for that you can direct to the office hours, as Puleng and Maggie mentioned. The aim today is to bring together relevant experts as panelists for this session from across the research community who will share and discuss their expertise and experience in developing various kinds of biomedical data ecosystems, frameworks, best practices, lessons learned around various concepts that leverage technology to establish the next generation infrastructure that would make data more discoverable, or I should say data and all digital assets more discoverable, accessible, reusable, and most importantly, foster a collaborative research community around these assets. Our expert presenters and panelists come with experience in academia, industry, the nonprofit, as well as other sectors, and they will discuss various technology solutions, as well as the importance of team science and partnerships. So that's really how hardware, software, and peopleware come together. Hopefully you will find the session informative and it will serve as a source of inspiration and provide a forum today to interact, leverage, and build collaborations to accelerate and advance your research. So without further ado, Katherine Lawrence will be our moderator for today's session. She is a research investigator at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and the Associate Director of Community Engagement and Exchange for the Science Gateway Community Institute, which is an NSF-funded resource to those developing science gateways. So, to you, Katherine.
Thanks so much, Ishwar. Thank you for that introduction too. I will talk a little bit more about the work that I do later on when each of the panelists introduces themselves, because I will also be hosting one of the breakout sessions that you'll have an opportunity to join later in this session. But for now, I'll be your moderator, and I want to give you a general overview of what to expect in this session. So we're going to begin with some introductions, both of the panelists and also from all of you who are here joining us today through the form of some polls, just to get a sense of the distribution of this audience. And after that, I'm going to pose a question as a brief prompt to trigger your thinking about data ecosystems and gateways. Then we'll move on to key highlights of the panelists' talks, which I hope you've had a chance to see. But this will give you kind of the key points, after which you can, we will have Q&A. That question and answer session will be the majority of this time, and then you'll be able to go to breakouts. So just in case you have not yet had time to see the panelists' excellent presentations, I'd like to begin by introducing each of them. First, Benedict Patton is an associate professor of biomolecular engineering at the Baskin School of Engineering at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He is co-PI of the Anvil project, which is an ecosystem of open, interoperable, and secure modules and data environments for the biomedical community. We also have Nicola Mulder, also Nikki. She's professor and head of the computational biology area at the University of Cape Town. She's also a principal investigator of H3A BioNet, which is a Pan-African bioinformatics network serving genomics data analysis. Susan Veldsman is director of the scholarly publishing unit of the Academy of Science of South Africa. She is representing the African Open Science Platform project, which provides the infrastructure and support to manage and use scientific data for the benefit of African society. Russ Taylor is a professor and research chair at the University of Cape Town and University of the Western Cape. And he is director of the Inter-University Institute for Data Intensive Astronomy. Now that may raise some questions for you, but he also joins us as leader of the ILIFU project, which is a cloud computing resource for data intensive research, and that it not only serves astronomy, but also bioinformatics. And last but not least is Jeffrey Siwo, who is a research assistant professor at the Center for Research Computing and the Institute for Global Health, which are both at the University of Notre Dame in the US. He joins us as the lead of the Malaria Dream Challenges project, which aims at predicting the changing biology of malaria through crowdsourcing. So with that, I would like to get us moving by learning about each other and our backgrounds. So we have 2 poll questions for you. I know if you have come to other sessions, there have been a number of these polls, but we're going to show you the answers as they come. So we would like both you and the panelists to have a better understanding of where you're coming from and what your interests may be. And this is going to help us shape some of how we respond during the question and answer portion of this. So first of all, where are you joining from today? And I'll give you a moment to jump to that page, and which is in Mentimeter, and answer that question. So we'll have a quick look here first as you join in. I see we have 14. I would love to hear from more of you. I know that there's close to 70 of us here today. So take a moment and enter in here so we can see how we distribute among the participants. There's a quick link to click in the chat area. If you can't find chat, that may be an issue. I'm not sure. It's at the bottom of your screen in the middle. You'll see a little speaking bubble, and if you click on that, you should be able to see the chat and go to the poll. Great. Okay, we're getting a little bit more representation here. It does seem like we have a lot of folks here from North America, but I hope that those of you who are elsewhere will chime in and let us know where you're from. I'll give you one more moment to say where you're from. All righty. So this gives us a sense of where you're from. It looks like a majority are from Southern Africa in terms of African origin or location. And with that, I'll take us off to the next question. So this is more about your research interests. So what fields or interests do you represent in the work? And you have several choices, 6 choices plus other. So I hope you'll follow that link and head on over to let us know where you're coming from. Intellectually, that is. So we know where you're coming from geographically now. We look forward to hearing what you say, where you're from in terms of your academic interests. So here are the results as they're coming in. Thank you all for answering. So it looks like there's a predominance in data science and informatics, as we might have expected, but there's still a good number from biomedical research and then the other areas, including public health and computer science. If anyone else wants to chime in with what their area is, we're happy to keep on refreshing. All right, we'll take one last look. Yep, it looks like it's staying sort of the same proportion. So I'm going to assume that those of you who haven't joined in probably fit this profile as a whole. And then I just want to also mention, just as an aside and a heads up, after the question and answer portion of today, I did mention that we will have breakout sessions, and based on your interests and what you feel that you would like to either discuss or know more about, you can head off to one of these 5 groups, which will be facilitated by myself and our panelists. So that is, you'll have an opportunity to see what those are again later in the session. So with that, I'm going to take us on to a conversation which will happen in chat. So again, if you've just joined us or you joined us late, along the bottom of your Zoom screen is a button that's labeled chat, and it is looks like a little speech bubble. If you haven't opened it yet, it often flashes orange as the comments come in chat. And what I'd like to do is get a sense of some of your perspectives on what a data ecosystem might look like and what it needs to accomplish. So I'd like to invite you now to think about the answer to a question that we can explore as a group through chat. So take a moment, 30 seconds or so, and reflect on the future. So imagine 5 years from now, the data ecosystem has transformed biomedical science and fostered research community networks across Africa. So think about what that might look like, particularly in terms of how it might help you with your research or your aspirations for healthcare in Africa. Now, as you think about that, and here's the question for you to answer: what are the components of this ideal data ecosystem? So if you could take a moment and put this in chat. We're gonna put the information, we'll be discussing it as it flows in. So I do encourage you all to put your response here. I also see that in chat, someone did ask whether you can record the event, and this is being recorded, so it will be made available online after the session with a link from the KaiStorm platform. So far I see that folks are being really shy, and I encourage you to think about what your answer to this question is in terms of what are the components of this ideal data ecosystem. So one comment just came in that multinational data ecosystems are necessary since no one country can do this alone. Also bringing in universities, industry practitioners, and businesses. Thank you, Lillian and Dowdy. We have connectivity regardless of what time it is. That's very important to have asynchronous access. Compliant with FAIR principles. For those of you who are not familiar with the FAIR concept, it has to do with accessibility and reproducibility and interoperability. Data curation platform, having that being a component for also publication of data, open licenses with clear terms of reuse, and metadata standards. These are great ideas, and we really appreciate all this input. It would be great to have open policies for data use, data literate decision makers, dictionary, controlled vocabularies when possible, and yeah, these are all really important components of existing systems. And I think that some of the presenters today you will also hear from will talk about how their platforms do this in other ways. Also, it will enable people to share, store, collaborate, and archive data. We have compute infrastructure as a service. So yeah, you can't just have the data, you need to be able to do something with it. Also, these ecosystems must include nonprofit and community organizations, right? So it's a full spectrum from government, academic, businesses, nonprofit, community. Accessible cost and interoperability have just come in. Having a data management plan. This is fantastic. I really appreciate all of this input. We have a natural product bank and share information worldwide for bioactivity, an optimal public-private partnership, a use policy, and very important, robust data security. Yeah, cybersecurity is a really important aspect, especially with biomedical data. Communication and cooperation. Thank you, Rick, for mentioning that. That based on my background, I know that is, while it's something we don't think of as a component necessarily, it's a really crucial ingredient. Secure and privacy-preserving platforms to share patient-level data for research and innovation. Indeed, that goes along with the cybersecurity. And then what will come of this is to provide evidence-based quality healthcare, which is really a very good point. That's what the goal is. So this is terrific. We have, more coming in, public resource. So now that I've gotten you all conditioned to ask questions, which is what you're going to be doing here when we have the Q&A portion as well, but also I'd like to just ask another question that I think would be fun to hear from about. So we have in here also another comment about a component: optimal data management, good policies, interoperability, and data security. That is a wonderful summary of what we've just heard. So thank you, Abraham. So the next question I'd like you to think about and put into this system is, into the chat area to respond to, is what can you bring to this effort to help create this ecosystem? So what can you bring to this effort, whether it's your expertise, the organization you come from, your perspective, your experience, that you can help do to help create this ecosystem? I'll give you a moment to think about that. I know it's a little more personal and a little more daunting, but I do encourage you to think about what is it that you brings you here today that makes it possible for you to be a part of this program. So Mesfin says expertise on platform design, data input, and validation. Ahmed says connections and data. Yeah, so, and that's one of the things that I've heard in some of the earlier sessions, that this isn't just about new data, it's also about bringing together existing data. Alashle, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, says research findings and data. Gavin says knowledge of data publication platform alternatives, both open and proprietary, plus systems for data curation, such as data wrangling and metadata interoperability. Yeah, wrangling that data does require experience and background. Bethany, I love to hear that you say that you're a connector, linking questions, data, people, and expertise. That's a wonderful skill to have. We have data coordination from Adwa. Eluum says, applying genomic and health data to personalized manufacturing of medicines. Super. And Aman says, building infrastructure and collaboration. This is wonderful. It's really great to hear this diversity of background that you all bring, because that's really crucial for making a really effective ecosystem. We have Abraham saying I have the pull of a software developer with integrated data scientists and health researchers. Give you one more minute to throw your thoughts in, and then from there we can carry it forward. It'll give us a little extra time for question and answers as well. Lillian says administrative and computing abilities on how to ensure communication occurs across the ecosystem and to make sure legal standards are in place. So I'm guessing that you may have also taken advantage of the ethics portion of this symposium. Ahmed says knowledge of problems in the clinical sphere with some health informatics experience. That's great. Translating across different specialties is a real need. Let's see here. Samuel says, I am on, oh goodness, the VEU PathDB outreach team for PlasDB, vector-based, etc. We look forward to assisting any way we can with our 15+ years developing our bioinformatic resources. And Samir says, training program on how to use the platforms and develop tools using them, genomics. So education and training is another component of this symposium and the FOA. Dowdy says training in bioinformatics and data science. I love to see how some of these answers are feeding off of each other, reminding you of things that you can bring to the table. It's not just maybe necessarily what your credentials say that you have, but some experience you may have had as you branched out and have become an expert. So we also have from Mesfin, digitizing paper-based data sets. That sounds like a really essential opportunity, particularly for any archival data, especially before it became, this kind of data ecosystem has been available. And Rick says coordinated food production and distribution. I'll give you one more minute to say, let's see here. Hadiza says integrate multiple data sources, use machine learning tools for data management and analysis. What I love hearing in this is this overwhelming sense of interoperability, collaboration, integration, and also across countries, disciplines, and so forth, which is really what the aspiration of this program is. So, all right, well, with that, I think it's slowing down. So now I'm going to invite each of the panelists to share their key takeaways from their longer presentations, which I hope you have seen. And as you're listening, I'd like you to please note any questions that you have. We're going to ask you for your questions after these short highlights. So if you prefer, as we are going along, you can add them to the chat here now that you have practice as they occur to you. So each panelist is going to spend just a couple minutes emphasizing those key takeaways from their presentations. But first, to kick off these highlights, I'd like to orient you a bit more to my reasons for being here today as moderator, because I will be joining the panel or the breakout on team science that's at the end of the session. So I'm joining this for 3 reasons. One of that is my role directing community engagement for the Science Gateways Community Institute, which Ishwar mentioned as he introduced me. This organization we call SGCI for short because it's a mouthful. But we are funded by the US National Science Foundation to support Science Gateway projects, much like those that will be proposed for the DSI Africa program. And our support includes a wide array of services, including hands-on development, consulting, online resources. We have training and community events. So just so you know, many of our resources and events are free or low cost. And for international projects such as yours, we can be written into grants to provide technical and other consulting services. But our events are open to anybody. Particularly like our conference, which has a small fee. You can learn more at sciencegateways.org. The second reason that I'm here today is because of my background studying collaboration and innovation. I'm not a technician so much as a behaviorist. And I've specifically focused on large multi-institution and multidisciplinary gateway projects. So there's a huge body of research that's looking at team science and computer-supported cooperative work. And much of that research focuses on what you would maybe call soft skills, which includes leadership, communication, organization design. And you know, people don't necessarily give a lot of thought to that as you're developing something technical, but if you are thinking about developing a proposal to become the coordinating center for the DSI Africa program and a gateway provider, I really encourage you to read and consider some of the recommendations that have been developed by researchers of team science and distributed collaboration. As my engineer husband said to me when we met 20 years ago, he said, I can always solve the technical problems in my work. It's the people problems that are always the bigger challenge. So I do encourage you to keep that in mind, and I imagine many of you have already experienced that challenge. And the third reason that I'm here today is simply because I enjoy facilitating conversations around technology, innovation, and the challenges that we share. So if you'd like to talk more about that facet of a coordinating center, you're welcome to join me in that breakout on team science after the question and answer portion. So with that, I'm gonna let each of our panelists talk in brief for 2 minutes about their key takeaways. So why don't we begin with Benedict?
Sure, thank you very much. I'm gonna just very briefly try to share my screen, see if this works. Great. So, so yeah, we're at this this moment in time where I think compute is undergoing a transition. I think traditionally we're used to this idea of researchers building compute infrastructure and bringing the data to their compute infrastructure. The problem with that model moving forward is that it costs a lot of money. If every researcher wants a copy of all of the data, then we've got N copies of the data. It's difficult to move data. It's really hard to do security in that model because everybody's got their own copy, and so you've got to keep track of all of that. It creates a lot of redundancy. And of course, if you created some kind of analysis and you want to share it, the problem is that your copy is the only copy that has that, that analysis with it. And so you've got this kind of natural siloing of research. So my talk sort of focuses on this notion of, of inverting that model and leveraging the cloud to bring researchers to the data. And the key economic advantage to that model moving forwards is that we then have one or a small number of copies within a cloud environment. So we would reduce the redundancy. We can do security in a very active way because we can essentially put a perimeter around that data, and we can responsibly, in a privacy preserving manner, audit who and what the researchers are doing with data. And ultimately, because we're inviting many people into that environment, we can provide greater accessibility to the data. And of course, because we're in a cloud, and I like the comments we saw earlier, we have the elasticity to provide people compute to do all the kinds of analyses that they want. And so my talk focuses on this concept and the data biosphere project that we have been pioneering. So, this concept of a data biosphere to bring the data into a computable environment and provide people access. If we're going to do this at scale, we need to do it in a modular and community focused manner. We need to do it in an open way that provides open standards and software so other people can come in and use it. And we need to be compatible with standards. And so I talk a little bit about that. The remainder of the talk, which I'm not going to go into now, really focuses on the key set of core projects that we've started the data biosphere around. And in particular, I talk about 3 efforts that my team at UC Santa Cruz is very involved in, that being NHGRI's Anvil project, NHLBI's Biodata Catalyst, and Human Cell Atlas. And so if you want to come talk to me about this or anything else, then I'd love to chat. Okay, good.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Benedict. So Nikki, did you have any little slides you wanted to share, or do you want to just talk?
No, I'm just going to talk. So hopefully everyone will have seen the presentations. So I'm going to just a reminder about what I was talking about. So we have a Pan-African Bioinformatics Network. We started this about 7 years ago, and at that point there wasn't much in the way of bioinformatics apart from a few pockets of expertise across the continent. So what HA-Bionet has tried to do over the 7 years is to increase that capacity in several different ways. One of which is working on the computing infrastructure itself, and there's no point having computing infrastructure if you don't have competent people to run that. So we've also trained systems administrators and various bioinformaticians to be able to use that computing infrastructure. Then we've also worked generally on data transfer and storage. So we are trying to enable the movement of big data sets across the continent. That is obviously challenging in the poor internet areas. And also then secure storage and encryption of data to ensure security. Then we've also worked on tools and workflows, so developing tools that are African data appropriate and workflows that enable African scientists to analyze their data here. And that would be on the computing infrastructure that we've developed. And then we've also worked very closely with PIs to help to standardize data to ensure that once data is collected, that the metadata is standardized so that there's a possibility to do meta-analysis and that the data is then of more value going forward. So we've developed various standards together with the Asia Africa Consortium and try to implement those. And then all of this obviously requires data interpretation. So we've developed tools for data visualization and interpretation. We've also had a very strong training program. So we have to train anything from bioinformatics users to clinicians to systems administrators. So we put in an extensive training program, and throughout the 7 years, we've trained more than 3,000 people. So I think the whole take home is that we have built a lot of infrastructure, and this could be used, it could be leveraged for any future activities in this area. And the aim is to enable African scientists to analyze African data of their own. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. That was a terrific summary. Now we'll move on to Susan.
Thank you, Katherine. My talk is about the African Open Science Project. This project was over 3 years, which ended at the end of last year, and currently it's being rolled out in phase 1 through the National Research Foundation, which is a funding agency in South Africa. So we hope that we can have some news about phase 1 of this particular project. This was a very interesting project, as we really had to sort of scout the landscape of Africa to see what's really happening on the continent. Are there any repositories? Are there any, how are they registered, etc.? And who are the role players in setting up these data repositories? And if they have data repositories, do they actually comply to particular standards, etc.? At the end, we had to come up with particular frameworks, and I think these are the pillars for any initiative in any country, especially if we collaborate with each other. So the one is to set up a particular infrastructure, is how do we incentivize researchers to actually contribute their data? Training, that is high on the agenda as well, and of course to have the necessary policies in place to govern and to direct the open access platforms. There were a couple of very good examples, of which Nikki now has just spoken about one, and that's the H3A BioNet initiative. And the GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Institute Foundation, which collected biodiversity information on and about Africa as such. And then, of course, Professor Russ Taylor, who will speak about the Astronomy Consortium and initiative that's happening currently also on the continent. Those three were fairly large collaborations, although the SKA is projected as being the largest. But I think there's already some very good examples on which we can capitalize, and where all these problems and all these challenges and also all the positive elements can be illustrated very well. So what do we need to continue with data sharing within Africa? It's really collaboration, trust, to capitalize what is already there and to strengthen those projects and those data repositories already on the continent. Leadership, and then of course partnerships. I really just like the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, then you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. And I think that's a critical matter for the African content as well, is to make data sharing in the biomedical field successful. So thank you very much, Katherine.
And thank you, Susan. So now we'll move on to Russ Taylor. Russ, I don't know if you have any slides you want to, a mini deck that you'd like to share.
Yes, so I hope people have had a chance to look at my presentation as well. I'll just summarize. I'm working in an institute that I'm part of in astronomy, is working at the core of a very big data challenge coming to Africa, and it's actually started now. So we're working on solutions for that big data challenge, and that's the big data challenge is in astronomy, and it's driven by this large project called the Square Kilometer Array, which is going to be deployed across 8 African countries, and represents, as a project, the biggest data challenge in science that's coming in the next decades, and it's coming to Africa. So we're working on building an in-Africa solution to empower African researchers to work with this data, and to so that we don't just ship data overseas and have all the research and outcomes happen in the rest of the world, but we actually have African researchers able to work with the data. And so our solution to that is to build an African cloud system, and I'm the project leader of that initiative, and it's called the LIFU, which is word for cloud in the local Xhosa language in South Africa. And that cloud system empowers researchers to work with the big data. Basically, it provides them with a supercomputer on their laptop. All of the data sets and all of the platforms for software and use of the data sits in a cloud that you access through a web interface. We now have over 200 users, and that user community is split between astronomy and bioinformatics. We have key bioinformatics projects in genomics and in viral diseases and precision medicine, and that use is growing. Our plan is to further develop this technology and to begin to federate this cloud with cloud systems with global partners in Europe and North America to build a global federated network which enables collaboration between global teams of researchers around the world on big data challenges. And that solution, I think, is quite applicable and could evolve into a solution for biomedical and health research as well in Africa.
Terrific. Thanks, Russ. And then let's move on to Jeffrey.
Hello, everyone. So over the past few decades, we've seen tremendous advancements in computing and exponential growth of data. We see that the internet is increasingly ubiquitous with over 500 million users in Africa today. And artificial intelligence is advancing at rapid speed. But in spite of this, we see that there is enormous progress in areas like cancer, but advances that rely on AI are really proceeding slowly when it comes to a disease like malaria or TB or many public health problems. So I believe that crowdsourcing, which is basically opening up problems to the entire world, can accelerate biomedical discovery and democratize science in Africa. So I'm really looking forward to discussing today on the role of crowdsourcing in harnessing data science for health discovery. Based on my experiences doing computational biology in cyber cafes in Kenya a decade ago, working as a scientist at IBM Research, and with several partners today as the lead of the Malaria Dream Challenge project at University of Notre Dame. So I'm looking forward to the discussions today, and thank you all.
And thank you, Jeffrey. So now it is time for the fun part where we get to ask questions of our panelists, and I will be keeping an eye on the questions. I encourage you to put any questions that have come up in chat. You'll see if you don't have your chat open already or currently open, it should be blinking right now because Emma has just encouraged folks to add your questions there. While you're thinking about any questions that you might have for the panelists, I'm going to pose one question that came in through the KaiStorm Post-it question page. And this one is really aimed towards Nikki. So the question was, with data generated through H3A BioNet, are there any efforts made to collaborate with pharmaceutical companies so that these data are used for drug and vaccine developments unique to the African population?
Thank you for that question. So H3 BioNet doesn't generate data at all because we don't actually recruit participants. We work with data. We help other researchers to work with their data. So if a collaboration gets started in that with a pharmaceutical company, that would be the onus would be on the data owner themselves to work with them. So our role in that would be to facilitate that by providing the computational resources, any analysis resources, tools and workflows, and if necessary, data management. So we work purely on the data side.
Whoops, wasn't unmuted there yet. Thank you, Nikki. We don't have any other questions coming in through chat, but I have a couple up my sleeves, which I would like to pass along to all the panelists while our audience thinks about other questions that you may have. What I'm curious to know is I was thinking about how the journey to the current state of your projects is probably a mix of both vision and evolution, with it changing as you saw the parameters of what could be accomplished. And I'm wondering if each of you would like to speak about what advice you would give about mapping out a plan of action to achieve your goals. What sorts of things you think about as you set yourself up for success. And anyone can volunteer to go first. I won't call on you because I know it's a bit daunting sometimes.
I can say what one aspect of this, Katherine, has been the need to harness diverse resources. I think one of the aspects of this new paradigm for data science that's being driven by science around the world is that to develop the solutions, you need to bring together knowledge and expertise from a broad array of expertise of areas, and really it's interesting that the very technologies that are challenging us in this sense are also providing the solutions for sort of a commons approach to solving problems, and empowering that commons approach, I think, is going to be key going forward.
Great, thanks. Does anyone else from our panel like to speak to that? Susan, it looks like.
Yes, please. So I really want to support Professor Taylor in what he just said. And I think it's extremely important. As already indicated, there are some great initiatives already on the continent. And I really think we just need a broader consultation and a pulling together of expertise and resources to just elevate those projects to a much higher level. I think the solutions are there. But sometimes just because of our connectivity or perhaps of funding or perhaps a little bit of training, has not come to fruition as yet. So I think we must just pull together to actually take all these projects just to a next level. But we have some very good examples on the continent in what we can work with. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for reinforcing that, Susan. It looks like Jeffrey may want to speak.
Yes, thank you, Russ and Susan. So I'll also emphasize that vision is really important, because vision is what will keep you going where others cannot go, and it will also drive you to look for those resources, look for those partnerships that you need to do what you want to do. And I think coming from the biomedical space is that always having a problem that you want to solve is also very key. Because once you have a problem that you want to solve, you begin to realize that many things are so complex that you can't solve them just using one tool, using one technology. And of course, there's always a bias that we have our favorite technologies that we want to jump into immediately. So I think having a problem enables you also to identify those tools that you need to solve your problem, and then also to draw in the partnerships that you need to do that.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I don't know if Benedict wants to chime in as well, but you don't have to, because we have more questions coming.
I'm just thinking, just digesting. No, I think those were all really good answers. Yeah, I agree with everything that was said.
Awesome, great. Well, we now have some questions coming in, which is super. The first question that came in is for Nikki, and the question is just, in what area is H3A Bionet Africa looking for collaborators? Have we lost Nikki? I guess we'll hold that question for a moment and come back to Nikki in a few minutes. And in the meantime, Benedict, since you are spotlighted and we have a question for you, the question is, can you discuss how data governance and ownership work in the scenario when the data's physical, geographic location is not tied to the same country as the data owners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, it's true that with the cloud, you can often find yourself in a situation where data may be sitting in a data center that is not physically necessarily close to you and may well be outside of your country of origin. I can speak, to my experience of working within the European and US context, where we have to deal with the legal requirements around security and privacy. And they're quite different and distinct. But in Europe, of course, we deal with GDPR. In the US, particularly with government data sets, we deal with FISMA and FedRAMP, and with health data through HIPAA. And I can say that we, firstly, we are able to move data around, and we pick data centers that are appropriate. Now, that is not always necessarily going to be possible in the African context, as I understand it right now. But something that I suspect is going to evolve. And I hope that we can get to, so the short answer to this question is it requires a lot of cooperation and thinking and careful coordination with an understanding of the requirements of the different participant countries and organizations. And therein that can create certain constraints. It is unlikely that we're going to be in a situation where all the data ends up in one data center. So we have to live in this world in which, yes, we have a cloud and we can kind of think of it as like completely ephemeral, but in reality, sometimes we're going to have to push analysis to specific data centers to access specific data sets. What I think is important, though, is that we have common standards and we have common interfaces, and that whether or not that data is sitting, in a data center in, Southern Africa, or whether or not it's sitting in a data center in, somewhere in the US, that actually looks the same from an accessibility point of view, and that ultimately we can aggregate results. But I think it's absolutely right that for good reasons there are these restrictions and requirements, and it's something that does complicate things, and something that we have to work around in trying to create something that is ultimately integrated and that feels seamless, even if we do have to manage around these requirements.
Terrific, Benedict, and we have another question for you that came in as well. So not exactly related. Peter asked, Anvil at the moment runs on Terra, which is closely tied to Google Cloud Engine. How can we make this data biosphere work for African researchers using, for example, the African cloud environments that Russ is talking about? And Russ is also welcome to chime in about the logistics, if that makes sense.
Right. So first off, standards are important, and the work that the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health is trying to do in fostering common cloud standards at the level of individual file formats through APIs and so forth, to gateway both access, but then provide common standards for data are really important. And those can be transferred to private, or on-prem cloud environments that might be being operated, and they can certainly be deployed within the commercial clouds. I'm aware that Google Cloud does not necessarily have good representation within Africa at this point. It is certainly possible, I believe, and I'm actually interested in people's experience, to potentially, have a gateway into a GCP instances that are running within the US primarily, or Europe, from Africa, and do analysis. But I think that we are looking at, within the data biosphere context, in the next year or two, and I can't speak in a lot of specifics because a lot of this is not yet announced, but we're certainly looking at having it available in more than just Google. So it is likely that we will see it in other, some of the other large commercial cloud environments. And I think that, longer term, as we move forwards, and as larger, large cloud initiatives kind of arise, as we've heard about, I think we can talk about ways to partner and provide gateways between these different data sets. Whether or not that data physically gets copied, or whether or not we provide sort of, if you will, kind of embassy kind of arrangements, I don't know at this point. But I think this is all to sort of figure out over the next several years.
Great, thanks. And Russ, I don't know if you want to add to that, or if you have experience with transferring information from someplace like a commercial cloud to your system.
No, we don't currently work with commercial clouds. The philosophy of our cloud system is that everything that we develop as platforms is open source. But we certainly host several platforms, including, I guess, a very popular one called Galaxy for bioinformatics research. And if somebody goes through the trouble of porting the Anvil system to a open source cloud platform, we can certainly install it and run it quite easily on a LiFu. I wanted to go back perhaps a bit to the previous question about data across national boundaries. I think that issue is an important one, and probably more important in medical research than astronomy. And I think that issue makes it very important for these developments to be done in partnership with governments, particularly in the African context. Because there are sort of two streams to these developments. One is a technical stream that most of us are working on to solve real problems that we have in our domains. But there's a very large policy framework around developing these as multinational endeavors. And that clearly is a role for government agencies to step in and to provide a policy discussion and a policy framework. So I think moving forward, it's going to be very important that this happens as a partnership between universities and technology drivers and governments who think about things like policy.
Yeah, just to respond on the Anvil comment. So everything that's being developed by under the funding from NIH for Anvil is open source. And so Galaxy, for example, is a component of the Anvil and is obviously an open source project. Similarly, all of the work that we're doing in terms of the database architecture and so forth, this is all open source. So the intent, with the Biosphere vision was really to create a set of modules that others can redeploy and reinvent. So I hope that there'll be a whole bunch of cross-fertilization between, our intent is not to try to operate everybody's data. Our intent is to create a set of standards so that lots of groups can come in and create their own, cloud environment. So I think that's very consistent with the vision that I think most of us all share about having something that is open and open to lots of parties to come in.
Great. Thanks, Benedict. Now that Nikki has joined us back again, I have a question that we posed just as you got your technical difficulties happening. So the question for you, Nikki, is in what area is H3A BioNet Africa looking for collaborators?
Thanks, and sorry for dropping off. It's Murphy's Law. You're going to
Of course.
Wi-Fi breaks. So H3A BioNet welcomes any kinds of collaboration in terms of building capacity for bioinformatics and data science. So we have many collaborations, including where people want to analyze data, where we want to build tools together, or where we want to develop training programs together. So the collaboration we're interested in is if you have some skills that you have to offer and you want to, work with bioinformaticians in the network. If you have some tools, so we're developing sort of African appropriate tools, and if you have the relevant skills or you have data that you want to test that out on. So there are a number of different areas in all aspects of data, genomics data management and analysis and training. Great, thanks. So a couple other questions, and this is an open question to all of you. If you could each take a moment to share your thoughts on how you pulled together a transdisciplinary team for your projects, because that is obviously requires a lot of translation across those different disciplines. So whoever would like to go first, you're welcome. Yeah, go ahead, Nikki. And yeah. I can kick it off. So I think our network is very multidisciplinary, and I think the projects that work the best are those that include the clinician, the basic scientist, your software developer, systems administrator, biostatistician. So what we've come to recognize is that the field is so broad that you can't be an expert in everything. And so you should actually build on the skills that you have and be prepared to bring in the skills that you don't have, complementary skills. So don't try and do statistics if it's not your area of expertise. So building a kind of a collaborative, multidisciplinary team is really identifying what you need for a project, what are the different skill sets you need, what can you address in your own skill sets, and where you need those others. So, and the possibility for novel discoveries is so much bigger when you have, because people come in with different ideas. My software developers come in with very different ideas to the mathematicians and the statisticians. And so it gives you a lot of sort of dynamic innovation in your projects to have those different approaches to a particular problem. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, would anybody else like to speak about that?
I can say a couple of words.
Sure.
So in the astronomy domain, we've reached the point where astronomy is becoming data science, right? That the traditional astronomers are running up against the wall of can't do their science without doing the data science. And it's become the situation that we don't have the skills in the astronomy domain alone to solve those problems. So we realized that we had to go outside of astronomy. So with an idea of the institute that I developed at the universities, it's a collaboration between computer science departments, statistics departments, mathematics, and astronomy, and engineering. And all of these solutions that we've developed for the cloud are actually built by the university researchers. It's developed as a research project. So that's been very successful. The other aspect of this is the training aspect, and another thing that's arisen out of this interdisciplinary approach to doing the science is the understanding that we need to train people that have this broad interdisciplinary skill set. And so we've been working to develop graduate programs in data science at partner universities as well to train this next generation. So I think interdisciplinarity is at the core of the future, and we need to build the systems to produce those people.
Fantastic, thank you. And I see Jeffrey would like to speak. I'm sure that crowdsourcing really speaks a lot to that, bringing lots of different disciplines together as well. So Jeffrey, would you like to go next?
Yes, so I think one of the most important things when trying to build an interdisciplinary team is to abstract some of the problems that we have in a way that people from different disciplines can contribute. And to give an example, when we run crowdsourcing challenges, which are also open to essentially anyone, like you don't need to have a degree, you don't need to be a biomedical scientist, but you need to have some skills in data analysis. And so what we do is that we abstract the problems in a way that even if you're not an expert, you can still come and contribute to the problem. And that's not to say that we don't need experts. We also cater to experts by sort of having a hierarchy of information. So we can present a problem from a very high level that it's accessible to anyone. Then we can provide more details as we go, digging deeper into the data. So if you're dealing with genomic data, it will start with matrices, then it will go into how was the data generated. And there are people who might even want to know, where can I get the raw data? So I think it's important to have this hierarchy of information. And I think also this opens problems to a very wide range of people. And you can see this very well in citizen science, where you can take some complex science problems and make them into games, for instance. So back in 2013, we developed a game called Free to Cure, where we took this complex problem of molecular docking, which is basically how drug molecules bind to specific pockets in proteins. And that gives you a way of developing drugs. And so we developed this game where even if you're not an expert in biology, you can bring the innate skills, that humans use to solve shape-fitting problems. And you can contribute to this problem and give new insights that even experts may not be able to give. And in a way, because experts are more likely to think down a certain route. And so we see this with incredible success from a game called Fold It for protein folding, where some of the top protein folding problems have been solved through this game, where people who are not experts in biology can come and help in this problem.
Great, thanks, Jeffrey. Susan, did you want to speak to this question? If not, I have a question specifically for you as well.
No, I didn't want to speak to it. Sorry, except just to echo what's already being said. I think it's very interesting, perhaps, to note the difference in the solutions that Russ Taylor is recommending, and perhaps what is being used in HVI BioNet. Although they sort of, I think, eventually could push into each other to capitalize on the actual solutions part, but it is quite interesting to see the different sort of approaches to data sharing as such, although there is a lot of dovetail between the two projects as such. Perhaps later on, if we run out of questions, Katherine, I would like to ask Nikki perhaps to talk a little bit about how they transfer and storage the data between the different consortium members and sort of the challenges around that, and how they came to the solutions of then eventually sharing data as such.
Sure, Nikki could speak to that, and I have a question for you coming up soon as well, Susan, after she talks about that.
Thanks, Susan. So we've tried various different data transfer mechanisms, and in the end, in many cases, the quickest and cheapest was actually to buy portable hard drives and courier them. So we did that quite a lot because there were some data sets that were taking literally months to move across the continent or to move from the US to here. We've also tried Globus Online and Aspera. We did a test between the two. At the moment, Globus Online is working well for us. And so where we have people that are able to have a Globus Online endpoint, we then help them to transfer the data to that endpoint. So where that's possible, and that seems to be the most efficient solution. Otherwise, we go back to the good old shipping of hard drives.
Nothing like sneaker nets, right? All right. So I'm going to pose the question to Susan, and then we also have another question from our audience. Susan, no, I just lost it. Just a second here. I was wondering if you could speak to your experiences and challenges in establishing an open science platform, particularly getting the buy-in from the various stakeholders, given that that is, again, bringing all these different disciplines together.
Well, I think what we've been talking about now is really just on a discipline level and in terms of interdisciplinarity. But what we did find in sort of in our exploring the landscape as such is that data sharing is actually on different levels. We have to think about the government, about particular policies right there. We have to think about sort of the research and development environments, how conducive or how ready are they to actually participate in something like data sharing. And very interesting enough, there was quite a sort of a, I want to say, quite a mix-up when we talked about the sharing of data, is to distinguish between research data and government data. Although sometimes government data is necessary for researchers to conduct the research and to explore it even further. So that took quite a time is when we spoke to governments, particularly about the sharing of data, because there was this whole feeling of, you know, you cannot share our government data. That is sort of our competitive edge, or our, for whatever reason, we have to hang on to that particular data. So that was quite interesting, and that we spend a lot of time with governments to say, no, that's not what we're talking. We are actually talking about research data to solve perhaps some health problems, etc., etc. So that was the biggest. And then, of course, then your networks. There are quite established research and education networks in Africa, being funded by in Switzerland by Giant, and so we have to build on those as well. So we need a separate discussion with the research and education networks as well, to ensure that they are on board and that they support and that they understand that their role is not just one of connectivity, that it's actually much broader, to provide other services to support researchers in actually sharing and collaborating, etc. And I mean, all that trickled down even to librarian levels. We had to talk about, to librarians, to talk about research data management and research data management plans and curation, etc. And then, of course, the researchers, we had to talk about, why don't you contribute? As they would sometimes say, but why should I? Nobody told me, or I'm using my own time and my own computer and my own data, and why should I share this? So from very basic sort of reasons like this to really problematic ones, to say, well, our speed is too slow. There are some intellectual property right issues around this. The whole governance issue of data. So you can see there are multiple players which we had to talk to and understand how they feel, where are they, and also who are those sort of central points which will be important in taking collaborations specifically towards open data forward on the continent.
So what I hear you're saying too is that there's this aspect of both willingness and physical capability that might be barriers to participation. It sounds like not, and they're not necessarily correlated, right? That some people may be really willing but can't physically do it. Yeah,
actually do it. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. A nice follow-up question for this came from William. He was interested in knowing about the role of national research and education networks in this data ecosystem, particularly for public health projects, and also whether institutions can collaborate with those countries, specific countries, NREN, to create and support the data science projects. Susan, you can speak to that, or anybody else can.
Yeah, maybe I'll kick off, and I'm quite sure somebody will actually chip in then perhaps after me. As said, the research and education networks are at different levels within Africa. Some are very advanced. If we look at South Africa, they are looking well together with the government to look at some high performance computing centers or some storage, some central storage for critical data sets, etc. So those are initiatives in South Africa, but the rest of Africa, it's still very low. At the moment, it is just about connectivity and not really providing services or storage facilities, etc. There are a couple of initiatives in Kenya, for instance, the agricultural grouping there. They have received some revitalized servers in which they have used and set up to assist them in sharing agricultural data within their research group and a little bit broader. But that's not the ideal situation. You've heard what Nikki has sort of very briefly referred to. And in my talk specifically, where we talk about hardware and software being outdated, etc., and that is highly problematic. But yes, the research and education networks are very well organized into broad regional groups. If one have a look at WACRIN, which is in the Western Coast, and then UbuntuNet Alliance, which is Southern Africa, one can actually connect directly with them and with the CEOs or the directors of the particular RENs. But they are very well organized and they meet very regularly. And I can see that data and storage, etc., is getting on top of their sort of agenda, making through our project when we made them aware of what is needed.
Thanks, and I see, both Nikki and Russ are unmuted, so maybe Nikki can speak briefly, and Russ, we only have a few more minutes before we have to move on to the next thing, so.
Okay, so I'll try to be very quick. So we have worked with SANREN in South Africa to try and speed up data transfers. So I think there is a big role to play for the NRENs in helping this, because what we find is that we measure internet speeds. We've got a project that measures in real-time internet speeds between different groups. And that is actually very different often to what the university says the network speed is, and that's because of these firewalls and things. So the NRENs can really help facilitate transfers, to DMZs where you can get, faster transfers and dedicated, they can open up dedicated lines and things. So I think there's a very big role to play for NRENs in research data as opposed to just general, university traffic.
Great, thanks. And Russ?
Yeah, I'll just very briefly state that NRENs are a critical part to our data distribution model for the big data and astronomy. We have set up data transfer nodes and regularly distribute data globally from the South African instrument. And that all happens on the NREN networks.
Great. So we have just a minute or two more before we're going to start transitioning to the next part in our breakouts. And since we haven't heard from Jeffrey or Benedict in a little bit, I'm going to first ask you if either of you would like to offer any closing comments or final thoughts that you'd like to share before we head off to the next part.
Just pitching in back on the question about what it takes to build this in an interdisciplinary manner. I can say that within the Biosphere group and specific sub-projects, we've really focused on use cases. So, we initially tried to design a system that provided basic facilities, but our development model has been very incremental. We've said, well, okay, we need to bring users in and we need them to test, to kick the tires of the system and see what works and what doesn't work. And we need them to tell us what they want to do. And we started quite small with a small number of people, sort of alpha testing group that has provided lots and lots of useful feedback. And that interaction, that constant back and forth between users and use cases and defining what it is you want to be able to achieve, and then going back to the technical question of how we can do it, that for me is the core cycle. And it's iterative, and it isn't some big planning meeting that happens right at the beginning, but actually it's an ongoing conversation between users and stakeholders. And that does involve people who are both producing the data, but equally importantly, it involves, just individuals, from graduate students to postdocs on up, right? Actually trying to do things within the systems that we build to make them accessible. And for me, that's the most exciting thing. And it involves people from, across across biomedical data science.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for speaking to that iterative process, Benedict, because that user engagement is really crucial to keeping them going. Jeffrey, did you want to have any closing comments or big takeaway you'd like someone to remember before we go to breakouts?
Well, I'll just say that I think, as we see from the representation of the expertise of the participants, it's clear that there's already that drive towards greater interdisciplinarity. And so I think there are obviously like technical barriers and social, ethical, as well as policy barriers that need to be addressed. And having partners in industry, in government, and in academia is critical to overcoming this. And I think this is a good step towards that.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And I just want to remind everyone, in a moment, you're going to hear about the breakouts, but those breakouts are really an opportunity to have a cozier conversation with each of these panelists. They'll be in the 5 different groups, and they'll tell you about that. So as a transition to that, I'd like to now introduce Nofisat Oki, who is a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow and a health scientist in the Office of Data Science and Emerging Technologies at the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is at the National Institutes of Health. She works with Ishwar, who you've heard from already, and is a member of the DSI Africa Symposium Planning Team. And she's going to be making some closing remarks, including reminding you of the opportunities that are still available as part of this symposium. And just so you know, as she is speaking, the panelists and I are going to leave for the breakout rooms where you'll join us soon. So we look forward to seeing you over there. Nofisat, would you like to take over?
Yes, sure. Thank you for moderating, Katherine. It's been a very engaging session.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to all our panelists as well. Thank you for the stimulating discussion. And to our audience members and participants, thank you for engaging with us in this Q&A as well. Before, the next thing on the agenda is, as Katherine mentioned, is the breakout rooms where you can have more deeper conversations with the panelists. But before we do that, I would like to give you a few reminders for events that are still scheduled for the next few days and others through the fall, the next 2-3 months. So the funding opportunity announcements, office hours, are, we have 2 tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern, US Eastern time, which is 3 p.m. East African time on the research hubs. And the next one on the research training program is at 9 a.m. Eastern, US Eastern time, which is 4 p.m. East African time. And then we also have 2 more on Friday, which are on the ethical, legal, and social implications of research, which starts at 8 a.m. US Eastern, 3 p.m. East African time, and the Open Data Science Platform and Coordinating Center, which is actually directly related to today's session, which would be at 9 a.m. US Eastern and 4 p.m. East African time. So if you want to speak with Ishwar tomorrow on Friday, that would be the time to do that. Also, we have the State of Data Science seminar series, which will start in September. We have about 7 of them scheduled. So please look through. If you go log into your Know Innovation platform, you can get more information about those events, and also on the Common Fund website. And last but not least, there will be ongoing NIH staff consultations for the persons of contact for each funding opportunity announcement. You can see their contact information on your screen, but you can also find that in the Know Innovation platform and also on the Common Fund website. So I'll now hand over to Maggie, who would take you through the technical details of getting into the breakout rooms. Thank you again for attending. We hope you find the rest of the session very informative and useful.
Terrific. I just want to reinforce how important those office hours are, what an opportunity it is to have your questions answered. And it's true that coming up next, we have the breakout sessions. Again, you get a little peek at these earlier. Data Biosphere with Benedict, Infrastructure and Open Science Platforms with Susan and Nicola, Cloud Computing with Russ, Team Science with Katherine, and Crowdsourcing and Challenges with Jeffrey. So what I'd like to do now is just give you a little bit of a hint about how to get to those breakout sessions, because we need you to go to another place to do so. So I'm going to share my screen and show you, probably you are here. When you go back to KaiStorm, you'll probably find yourself on this page, the interactive panel plenary page, because that's what you did to get here. You jumped onto that button. But what I'd like you to do is actually to go back and go to the Wednesday, August 19th page. And if for some reason you happen to be up here or you're somewhere else, it's really okay. You can just go to the Wednesday, August 19th page. And if you scroll down, you will see each one of these sessions that I've just mentioned to you. And what you do is you click through. If you want to go to this one on Data Biosphere, you'll click through, and then you'll see there's the green Zoom button, and you could join that one. Or if you're interested in going to Team Science to see more of Katherine, same deal, you'll just do that. The tricky bit is, in order to get into those rooms, you have to leave this room. So there's a little red button at the bottom of your screen, and in a moment, not yet, because we have a few more quick announcements before we send you off, but you'll leave this room, you'll go to this page, you'll navigate to whichever session you'd like to go to and enter into it. Okay. If by any chance you get thrown off somehow, you can always scroll down and go to the Need Help page. And if you go in there, someone will be able to help get you where you need to go. Okay. So, Puleng, some closing comments and announcements before we send people off to join the sessions?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing. And, you know, one more tip before you go off. If you want to, please save the chat and retain some information that was shared. Lots of information was shared, questions, save it, and then keep all the comments from the program so far. So that's just at the bottom corner of your chat screen, right click and just click on save. And then we can review it later. Now, we really thank you for joining us today, and those who were with us for so many other sessions in the last 2 weeks. It's really been great. It's been wonderful to host you, us, Maggie and I, Joe, Emma, Binyam, Ash, and Connie. We've really been privileged to host you this week. It's been wonderful. Remember that the symposium continues until Friday. So just because the plenaries are going to stop today, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue with the office hours and go on the Keystone platform. You can still watch the videos. You can still see the partners' profiles. You can also do the People Explorer and meet more people. You can even go to the network launch. So you still have an opportunity to enjoy yourself and continue. Thank you, everybody. It's really been a pleasure. Have fun. Let's go to Keystone and have fun in the plenary sessions this afternoon. And remember, at the end of the plenary, we'll also ask you to fill in a poll and give us feedback on your experience today and also the experience of the whole symposium. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.